Hello and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're glad you could join us today. My name is Olivia Tuller and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on September 21st with James Tanner. He will be giving a presentation entitled Breaking Through the Genealogy Technology Barrier. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Dennis Packard, who will be giving a presentation on Inspire Library, Sharing Stories of Inspiration. Before we begin, here's a little bit about Dennis. Dennis Packard wanted to pursue a career in the performing arts, and so after completing an associate's degree in Southern California, he transferred to Stanford as a piano performance major. But when he took a course at Logic, he was impressed with the beauty of careful reasoning, which he didn't see much of during the contentious Vietnam era. So he transferred into the philosophy department at Stanford. Even before completing his PhD at Stanford, he was recruited to come teach logic in BYU's philosophy department. At BYU, he learned from Arthur King, a Shakespeare scholar in the English department, how logic was a traditional part of the trio taught for 2,000 years of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And so he studied grammar and rhetoric in scripture and Shakespeare with Arthur King. He then completed at BYU a second PhD in theater and film, and he produced for BYU an award-winning PBS choir program and BYU's first theatrically released feature film. After 40 years of teaching logic and philosophy of art and film at BYU, he continues to work with BYU colleagues on how to tell and video short documentaries and narratives. And that is what we are here to learn about tonight in this webinar entitled Sharing Stories of Inspiration. And we'll now turn the time over to Dennis.
Okay, great. Well, what I'm going to try to do is go through some tips for sharing stories of inspiration. And then I'm going to talk about some resources for sharing stories of inspiration. And then I'm going to give you some examples of them. And then we'll finish with some ideas about how you can start sharing stories of inspiration. So starting with the tips. Everyone has stories to tell from their own life experiences that may inspire others. And as family historians, you also have stories of inspiration to share about your ancestors. Now, stories don't have to be miraculous or momentous. Stories of inspiration can be about regular, imperfect people doing small and simple things in inspired ways. As family historians, you are storytellers. Your challenge is to invite people to care as much about these stories as you do. How you tell your stories can make a big difference in whether others will want to hear the story or will feel inspired by it. So here are some principles of telling stories of inspiration that will help you as you write your own life stories and the stories of your ancestors. I strongly suggest that you start with brief stories, learn how to write those well, and then go on to longer ones. And I'll tell you more about that later. So there are certain basics are needed to tell stories that engage your audience and invite them to learn with you in your story and with your ancestors in theirs. So the little model that we have, we abbreviate it as CHIRP. The idea is that if you start your story with a challenge that you or one of your ancestors or the character in your story is facing, that will draw your audience in. They will care. We are naturally built to care about people facing challenges. And then we're looking for a moment of inspiration. And that can come in a variety of ways. And that inspiration will help the person deal with that challenge they're facing. And that will lead to a result where things start getting better. And that will finally lead to a principle that is learned. That's the CHIRP model with 4 steps to it. Now, other elements that are important with this is that as you tell your story, you want to invite interpretation. That's a key to telling engaging stories. It's a mix of showing and telling. And I just want to say that learning how to tell stories that invite interpretation is really crucial. It's part of the great tradition of the Bible, which is a huge family history, so to speak. And what that means is you have to show certain things and tell certain things, but you don't tell everything. If you tell everything, it leaves the audience without an opportunity to interpret what is going on. So, for example, one of the great biographies of all time is the story of David. And the story starts like this. It says, at a time when kings went forth to battle, David lingered at Jerusalem. Now, it doesn't say why he lingered there. It leaves it up to us to think about it. And then it says, and then in the eventide, he rose from off his bed and walked on the terrace, and that's what he sees Bathsheba. If you look up eventide, it means late afternoon. So we are supposed to infer something. He's not going to battle when everybody else is going to battle, and he's sleeping in, taking long naps. What is going on with him? Do you see how the story is giving us the details that allow us to assess character? Now, this is a key element of what constitutes art. Art is what lets us interpret what is going on. If everything gets too obvious, it ceases to be art. It ceases to be engaging and inviting. And so the elements that you want your interpretations to be neither obvious nor obscure. So if everybody looks at this thing and they all say exactly the same thing, then it's too obvious. If they find that it's obscure and they can hardly talk to each other about it, then it is obscure and it's not obvious enough. What you want is a story that has enough details that people will get in and start discussing it with themselves. It's the kind of a mark of a good movie when you go to a theater. If the people, when they're coming out, if they are talking with each other about what they saw and what it means, that's a good sign that the movie is going to invite your interpretation. So besides the chirp model, you've got to get the details in there, but put the details in there that are going to invite you to interpret what is happening in that story. Not only what is happening, but what is the state of heart of the character, just like the story of David that I was suggesting to you. So you want it to engage the audience in that way. Now, if you add audio and video to your stories, that can help as well. And that's one of the things that we're trying to help people do, to be able to add audio and video to your stories. But again, one of the problems, if you want to call it a problem, about photography and video and so on, is that you can clearly see what you're looking at. It's not obscure like a painting or something. And so how do you still invite interpretation? Well, your audio and your video has to be told and shown in a way that doesn't spell everything out, and that we are constantly looking at the characters and assessing what is going on with them. And in my opinion, the more you learn to tell your stories visually and orally, that is going to help a tremendous amount. When you tell your story, what are you picturing in your mind? And what are you hearing, almost like voiceover in a theater? So let me give you an example. In my opinion, probably the very finest short story ever written is The Parable of the Prodigal Son. And some people say it should be called The Story of a Father and His Two Sons. And anyway, it starts off like this. A certain man had two sons. Now, what do you picture when you see that? I picture them at a dinner table. They're talking with each other. I'm seeing them, and I'm hearing the voiceover say that they had two sons. We're not going to take a long time to establish that they have two sons. We're just going to say it, and that's okay. And then the younger son says to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. So we have to figure out now, what is he saying? And what does that mean? What does that tell about him? Well, we know he's asking for his inheritance early. Now, the text does not say, and that was presumptuous of him to say. It doesn't spell it out at all. It just says it. And now we have to interpret it. What is a son like who goes to his dad and says, Dad, could you give me my inheritance before you die? We're left thinking about that. And now we want to know, what is the father going to do? And the father, it says, and the father divided unto them his living. So that's a little surprising. He just, I picture him up on a slope, on a hill, and he's saying, okay, this part over here goes to the one son, this goes to the other son. That's kind of what I picture. And I'm left thinking about, does the father know that the son is going to get into trouble? He probably does. But so why does he do that? Do you see, it's just super engaging, inviting me to interpret and to think about this. And then it goes on in a series of what is called montages, where it says, and not many days later, he gathered all together. What does that mean? He probably sold that portion of his property, took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his living with wasted his earning with riotous living. And then it goes on and says, and when a famine came up, he did this. So we're seeing just little bits. Think of it like a movie. I'm watching this thing. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing him sell the property. I'm seeing him riding on a donkey someplace. I'm seeing him going into a bar. It just goes lickety split until we open up to the scene where he finally is talking to the pigs and he is coming to himself. That's the moment of inspiration for the son. So anyway, these things are very important to learn to think visually and orally like this. And I just want to assure you that it's not rocket science to learn to do that. It's really a matter of getting into the Jewish tradition of telling stories, the way that you tell stories that they've been told for 2,000 years, and they are so engaging and interesting to us, and we can't let them go. That's the tradition that we need to get into. And later I'm going to show you a link to an article that I wrote about these Jewish scholars that are talking about how they tell stories and why they work so well and why they engage us. And I just want to assure you that the principles they're talking about are the principles that good writers of stories use constantly. Okay, now another major principle of good storytelling is to work in groups and share your stories with each other and get feedback. The idea of just being a writer off by yourself and doing your own little thing, it's just really tough. It's very hard. So you get the best television series and the writers are working together. They're passing things by each other. Pixar has a little group called The Brain, and they get together and they share their stories. And so the Toy Story pieces went through dozens and dozens of changes until it was really, really working. And having a group is just very important. A lot of writers say that that's the most important thing for them, is to be in a group that they can share their content with and get feedback. So now, if you learn to tell brief stories of inspiration, how do you tell long ones? I know many of you are probably working on long family histories, but how do you go from telling really engaging short ones to telling long ones? Okay, now this is the idea. You write a brief, engaging story summarizing many brief stories. So in other words, in 500 words, 1,000 words, you go through summarizing little stories that you are going to tell. And that summary needs to work itself. It has to be an interesting story. And then you write all the brief ones out in detail. And I just want to assure you that it works beautifully. And I'm going to show you an example shortly. But the idea is you know a whole bunch of important stories in your history. You know many of them that are stories of inspiration. You think of all those stories, and then you try to tell one overarching summary story of what happened in this thing that will bring those elements out. You make sure that that story works, reaches people. And then you take each of the little stories inside of it and you flesh those out, okay? So with that much said, I want to then now introduce you to a BYU Research Site that has resources that can help you view and comment on and share and tell stories of inspiration. It's like a YouTube channel, or it's like YouTube itself, but only it's curated with good content worth sharing rather than mere diversion. But there are lots of short little pieces there. It's a site you might find useful as inspiration for your own life and for others who may benefit from the stories on the site. It's also a site where you can get help telling engaging stories of inspiration in groups. You can join groups there. You may want to contribute the stories you write on the site to the site itself, or you could share them elsewhere. And all of this is provided free. As I mentioned, it is a BYU research site that we've been working on for a while. The site is called Inspire Library. Now I'm going to play for you, it's about 7 minutes long, a little video about Inspire Library, addressing the frequently asked questions about the library. What is Inspire Library? InspireLibrary.org is first a library, second a production studio on both. Let's make it full screen. Curates and produces quality stories of inspiration shared worldwide. What kinds of stories are in Inspire Library? Stories in the library are stories of inspiration. Stories in the library aren't simply stories of exemplary good guys. They aren't simply good guys fighting bad guys, or humble guys hanging in there and succeeding. Stories of inspiration in the library start with a challenge, with things getting worse, sometimes because of the condition of the character's heart, and then come to a moment of inspiration, which leads to a result, with the things getting better, and a principle learned, CHIRP for short, said like Italian. Research shows that CHIRP stories are the most engaging and heart-changing stories to tell. Great literature and sacred texts are full of these stories. The challenge draws us in to care about the main character. The inspiration and result and principle learned by the character help us learn and change with the character. Learning from a well-told story takes longer than just being told, but it's more effective in character building. Leave out any element of a story of inspiration or tell them in a different order, like starting with the principle learned, and the story is going to be much less effective and memorable. Some stories in the library are written stories of inspiration. Some are audio and many are video. Some are movie clips. Some include commentary. Most are short, some are longer. Some stories focus on religious inspiration and some on moral inspiration and change of heart. Some focus on inspiration from nature or books or other people. Inspiration from any of these types of sources helps you freely choose new ways of dealing with challenges in your life. What can you do in Inspire Library? On your own or in groups you join, you can view, comment on, and share stories meant to bring strength, peace, and healing to the storyteller and to those facing similar experiences. You can search by keywords in the upper right bar for challenges you or someone you know is facing. You can easily share a story on social media or share a link in another way to friends and family. And you can share your story in the library worldwide. Everyone has stories of inspiration to tell, and viewing, commenting on, and sharing those in the library prepares you to recognize and tell your family stories of inspiration. You aren't simply telling a chronological story of what happened. You are looking for challenges faced and inspiration received in dealing with those challenges. Research shows that the most resilient children are those who know these types of stories about their family. You can start telling family stories of inspiration by submitting one at inspirelibrary.org/submit. It may help to imagine you are telling your story to a friend or family member you want to share it with later. What can you do in groups at the library? Groups can help you tell your family stories. Accomplished writers often say the most important thing for them is to be in a group with other writers and confer with each other and get feedback and suggestions on their writing drafts. If you go to My Groups under the account icon at the upper right, You will see groups you can join and what they are doing and what type of members they are looking for. You can also start a group there. You will find groups with story sharers who help you recognize and understand and share stories of inspiration. You will find groups with story scouts who will help you find stories of inspiration in your family histories. You will even find groups who will help you go on to a film fast, to stop watching films without inspiration and focus on a diet of films with stories of inspiration, like those with clips on the view page in the library. To Kill a Mockingbird is an example. Based on family histories told in the city, it took 2 years to edit together as a book read worldwide and became a classic film with powerful scenes of inspiration. With a healthy diet of films like that, you will start seeing stories of inspiration all around you. You will also find groups who will help you polish and video your family stories of inspiration. You can tell your stories in written or audio form and get them posted in the library. Or if you want, a group can help turn your story into a short documentary or a narrative video. Research shows that videos are shared 4 times as often. All a group needs to video your story is a 4K phone, a $40 mic, and a computer. All a group needs to compose original music for your story is real instruments or voice to be recorded, or virtual instruments with a MIDI keyboard and a sequencer. A group can help you tell your story in 4 stages for a documentary or 8 for a narrative. With a documentary, you tell your story on video and you show along the way what you're talking about with photos and video clips, your B-roll. With a narrative, you or actors reenact your story and tell some of your story as voiceover. Your group confers and gets suggestions on each stage before going on to the next. This is the most effective, professionally proven way of telling quality stories efficiently. A group can help you understand the free training materials in the library. Some of the very best professional software for videoing your stories is now free, dropped into our laps, and it isn't hard for a group to use them like professionals. How will a group you join work in the library? Your group will report weekly about what each of you did the last week and hopes to do the coming week. It's a brief weekly meeting of return and report and plan. Writers in your group will polish submitted stories to get them ready to appear in the library. Videographers and composers will video quality stories that appear in the library. Their videoing and composing will build on the quality of the written stories. They won't try to compensate for poorly written stories. They will do everything they can to bring out the quality of the stories that make them engaging and heart-changing. As your group works on stories and stages, you may well be invited to peer review stages. When you peer review, you and your storyteller are emailed a half-hour video meeting invitation during a mutually available review slot to discuss a current stage of a story and get suggestions on how to improve it. Your group may also invite a staff reviewer to the group, a professional who will have final say on whether your group is ready to go on to the next stage of a story, so you finish efficiently with a quality story or video posted in the library. Groups that peer and staff review stages of their stories can know their stories will appear in the library when they are done. Those who don't review in stages can submit their completed stories, which may appear in the library. Could your group work on a long family story of inspiration? Doing short documentaries and narratives prepares you to work on features and series on our mother site, plotza.com. It is all the same process, only more is added, like subplots. For example, one of our users is helping to develop a feature script about his Italian ancestors. It is based on extensive historical research by a cousin of his in Italy. It is called Sam Night Warrior. It is being written by a screenwriter in Bologna and one in Rome. Their synopsis is about to go to distributors and lead actors. How do you learn about all of this in more detail? Contact us at inspirelibrary.org/contact, and we will show you around the library in more detail. Okay, well, so that's a brief introduction to Inspire Library, these resources to help you in telling your written stories and then to getting them videoed if you'd like. So let's go back to that those notes there. And so I'd like to now show you some examples of these stories. The first one is a written story, and it is called Terrible Fear. It is a story of an ancestor. So if we can go to that. And then the second one is a documentary It's Praying for My Bully, a videoed personal history story. The third is a narrative piece, which I am convinced is based upon some family history. And the fourth is a summary piece of that Italian piece based upon family history research. So we'll show you each of those. Now, if you have any comments about these videos, be sure to put them in the chat box and we'll address them at the end, okay? So here's the first one. I'm going to read it to you. My grandfather was hiding in a cave with 8 other civilians on Wake Island. They had dug out the cave between bomb craters. They, with many others, had come to the island to build an airbase. My grandfather was 48, hoping to earn money to send his many children to college. The other men were much younger. For 3 nights, he had helped move the big guns to hide their locations from enemy gunfire. And during the day, he had helped move the wounded to the hospital. The Japanese, furious that this little island was holding out, had brought more warships and increased its bombing from once a day to twice to 3 times. The military and civilians on the island had hoped a rescued carrier would reach them from Pearl Harbor. It had come within 600 miles, but signaled they must turn back. The military then told the civilians on the island this: they were now on their own. And they scattered without weapons in small groups to hide. And now the island was surrounded with Japanese warships, with soldiers swarming onto the island. The island was rather silent now after the fighting Marines had surrendered. But the men could still hear the rustling of bushes as soldiers searched for them. Suddenly, the man on guard for this little group started shrieking, and the men inside ran out and grabbed him and brought him into the cave and roughed him up until he quieted down. My grandfather watched. It was now his turn to stand guard. He left the cave trembling and went to his lookout post. He knelt at the bush nearby and prayed, not that he would be protected, but that the terrible fear he felt would leave him. He just finished his prayer when he felt a bang against his helmet from the butt of a rifle that spun him around. There, pointed at his throat, was a bayonet. He looked up at the surprisingly tall soldier. He looked at the soldier's face. A smile came over my grandfather's face. The soldier lowered his bayonet, and my grandfather stood. The soldier let him keep his helmet and ended up watching over this prisoner of his on the ship to the prison camp in Shanghai, China, where he would spend most of the next 4 years, and where he would urge younger men to be patient and not try to jump the fences and get shot. When he returned home, he was often asked to speak about his war experiences. He focused on the Japanese people who had helped them. One older Japanese lady would sneak food through the fence that was electrified at the top at the camp he was transferred to in Japan towards the end of the war. He told how our B-29 bombers started dropping very heavy barrels of food to them once the war ended, and one dropped on the nearby house of this kind Japanese lady and killed her. He was against the Japanese government, but he never hated the Japanese people. He never called them Japs. He had developed a love for the Japanese. So that little story was less than 500 words. And a lot of those little short stories, that's what we're going for. It's something about less than 500 words. So this one is called Praying for My Bully. And it's done as a documentary where you interview somebody telling the story and then you add B-roll, shots of what it is that she's talking about.
So I was a sophomore at Skyline High School. I had a boy that just began to be really unkind to me. When he saw me in the halls, he would approach me and he'd point at me, draw attention to me, so everyone would look, and he'd say my name, and he would say a lot of unkind things. And I remember cowering, looking up at him, and really started to affect me was when it was repeated, when it became this habitual bullying. That's when it became terrifying. I was racking my brains. Had I said something? Had I looked at him wrong? Had I offended one of his friends? Or I didn't know if he was going to hit me. I started to dread going to school. One morning, I got up and read my scriptures. But this time, I had a little bit more of a reason and a purpose for reading. I wasn't just reading to be a good girl and check the box and do it. I needed help because I didn't want to go to school. I had that pit in my stomach where I just was like, oh, if I run into him, it's going to be so humiliating. I didn't know how I was going to make it through the day without some help. And as I was reading, I came across our Savior's words where he says, "But behold, I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them who despitefully use you and persecute you." Now that really stuck out to me, to pray for them who despitefully use you. And that was like the bam in the scripture. So I just knelt down and I said, okay, God, I am going to pray for this enemy that I have. And I know he's your son, and I know you know him, and you know why he's behaving the way he does. I don't know his life. I don't know what's going on in his home. I don't know what his insecurities are, but I'm going to pray to you every time I think of this person. I thought of him hundreds of times that first day. And so I probably prayed for him 200 or 300 times that first day. It didn't solve my problem. My problem didn't go away. I was able to make it through longer periods of my day without being consumed with this thought of being bullied. I was able to feel peace. Miraculously, after 2 weeks of praying for him, my little home phone rang, and I picked up the phone and was shocked to hear him on the other end. And he said, "I know I haven't been treating you kindly, and I just want to apologize." And I was so shocked that I probably just said, "That's okay, thanks, bye." I remember getting off the phone and just being full of gratitude and realizing, oh my goodness, these scriptures are magical.
Okay, good. I'm hoping that you're seeing these 4 chirp elements: the challenge, the moment of inspiration, the result, and a principle that was learned. So this next one is an animated story. It's also about bullying. The first one that you saw, if you think of military as bullying, it's kind of about bullying as well. So this third one is about bullying as well.
Hello? Oh, I'm so glad you answered. Sophia had her precious feelings hurt because I said a bad word. You better send the ambulance right away. Wait, listen, I hear it coming. Wah! Wah!
Be quiet, Tyler. I'm serious.
Or what? You'll arrest me? You're such a baby, Sophia. Nothing?
I am not in mood.
Sophia refusing to boogie with Granny? That means something is really wrong. What happened?
Sophia kindly asked the boy on the bus to stop cursing, and instead of stopping, he took it to the next level, and then made fun of her.
Ay,
But I told him to be quiet, and he stopped. He didn't stop. The bus drove off. Minor detail. I'm sure he likes teasing you because you can't help but react. No, I don't. Oh, yeah? I get the computer first for homework. What? No, I called it. See? Awesome reaction. Later.
you're very brave, telling that boy how his language made you feel.
I always want to stand up for what I feel is right, but when I did, it only seemed to make it worse.
I think it wouldn't have mattered who told that boy to be quiet. He probably wouldn't have stopped.
It's just that it hurts my heart when I hear words like that. I can totally feel the spirit go away. That makes life a little better.
Give it a half an hour and it'll be ready. Now, It's obvious you cannot control that boy, but what can you control?
Nothing.
Really? Nothing?
Yeah, right, nothing.
Take a break. You can argue with...
Wait, what did you say? I didn't hear you.
I said you can argue with that boy or find other ways to deal with the problem. I'm sure Heavenly Father would help you figure out different solutions if you ask him.
Sophie, you can do this.
Oh, Sophia! Did your insurance cover the cost of the ambulance? You know, you inspired me yesterday. So, last night I looked up some other spicy words that might interest you. We can thank the internet. Ooh, let's start with this one. Ever heard of the word okay, well, how about this one? Now don't pretend like you can't hear what I'm saying.
Wanna listen?
Okay, very good. Now we're going to look at this last one, and this is again, it's fairly short. The two writers are going to introduce themselves, and this is a summary of what is going to be a longer story. It could turn into a novella, and then it could be filmed. And watch for in the middle where there is a key moment of inspiration where things really change. The story is kind of a Romeo and Juliet kind of a story, where the kids that fall in love come from two different warring families.
Hi everyone, my name is Paula De Meglio. I'm an Italian actor, screenwriter, and film director. I studied screenwriting and film direction in my city, Rome. I also studied acting here and also in New York at the Stella Adler Acting Studio. My last two projects are a short movie that I wrote and directed like 1.5 years ago. It's called Cuore, that means heart in English. And I'm very proud of it because it won a lot of very important awards here in my country. And the last one is a feature film called Nina dei Lupi, Nina of the Wolves. premiered in Venice at the end of August, and now it's just been released in movie theaters. So I hope it's gonna have a long life. I wrote this movie, Nina of the Wolves, with 3 people, and one of them is Paula Fabbri, who worked with me on this new project called The Some Night Warrior. So we're gonna read to you the synopsis. We hope you enjoy it, and thank you for your attention. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Anna Paula Fabbri and I'm an Italian screenwriter. I studied screenwriting in Rome, and I was very lucky to have, as a teacher, one of the best screenwriters in Italy, who is Umberto Contarello, who wrote The Great Beauty, La Grande Bellezza, directed by Sorrentino, which won an Oscar. About my works instead, my best works so far are a docu-film, Benelli su Benelli, which is about an Italian motorbike champion in the 30s of the last century, and who was born in my hometown, Pesaro, near Bologna, and a dystopic film, Nina dei Lupi, Nina of the Wolves, which is based on a novel by an awarded writers of Italy. Both of them premiered at the Venice Film Festival, and I was very proud about. And but I must say that Benelli su Benelli was premiered 2 years ago, instead of Nina dei Lupi, which premiered last August. This new project, The Some Night Warrior, is our last project, and we hope you like it, as I do. Bye!
The Some Night Warrior. Rome, 65 before Christ. What if 17-year-old Marcio, an ardent supporter of the greatness of Rome, with dreams of becoming a valiant commander, in love with Lucilla, the granddaughter of the late Roman dictator Sylla, learns that he is the grandson of Gavio Papio, one of the greatest Samnite commanders in eternal struggle against Rome, considered a vile enemy and a traitor? What if Gavio Papio claims custody of the boy and forces him to leave Rome and join his journey to the Samnio, to recall his scattered people who were massacred by the Roman army 17 years earlier, and, as it seems, to follow his tremendous desire for revenge against Rome itself? Marcio, to whom Roman society has always taught him contempt for those who are not Roman citizens, and especially for the Samnites betrayers, feels devastated by the discovery of his origins and what the future holds for him. During the imposed journey to the Samnio, he continues to hold strongly to his vain dreams of Roman glory and rejects every memory, tale, and teaching propounded by Gavio Papio. And that is why, throughout a stopover, he secretly contacts the governor of Angitia, previously met, and exposes to him his concerns about a possible revolt. Gradually, however, Marcio becomes fascinated by the fighting and riding skills typical of the Samnite people, and learns of the tragic Italic people's massacre commanded by the dictator Sylla, when they decided to create a federation to free themselves from the empire dictates that would only make them dependent on a corrupt and unfair power.
Moreover, watching his grandfather be moved by the ruins of the now razed village where Marcio had been rescued as an infant, the boy comes to a moment of inspiration that changes the course of his life. He realizes that Gavio Papio no longer wants to wage a war of revenge against Rome, but only to unite all the scattered Italic peoples under his and his grandson's leadership, to restore their hope and dignity, and that his grandfather must have felt great sorrow at the end of his family, his people, and the uncertain fate of Martio himself. For the first time, the boy feels a connection to that old man and begins to understand him. But it's too late. The governor of Angizia sends an unarmed ambush on him and Gavio Papio for the sole purpose of stealing for his own gain the Samnite treasure, a treasure that Martio himself had revealed to him as an evidence of an assured and sponsored Samnite revolt, and ends up killing Martio's grandfather when the plane falls. Meanwhile, in Rome, Lucilla, having learned of Martio's true origins without this news affecting her love for him, decides to go to the Samnio to warn him of a massive Roman attack on the Samnites, who have turned against the governor of Angizia. But once there, she realizes that Martio is no longer the boy eager to serve Rome, but a real Samnite warrior, who accuses her of belonging to the lineage that has commanded the destruction of his own family and banishes her from his land. Will Martio, now leader of Italian people, find a way to reconcile his good Roman side with his Samnite side, or will he make the radical choice to go to war against Rome, as his new people expect and demand?
That story is based upon extensive historical research by descendants of the Samnites. And the Romans tried to bury that history. And it's just been in the last decades or so where they've uncovered that history and found that, and started teaching it in the schools and helping to see how Italy became unified as a result of these groups pulling together. So now, with that much said, here are some things about starting to share stories of inspiration on Inspired Library. The first thing is you can go to just straight inspiredlibrary.org, and there you can create a free account. And then you can look on and the groups that are there. Go to inspiredlibrary.org/groups, and you'll see the various groups that are working on things, and you can decide if you'd like to join one of those groups and get help from them. And then, perhaps most important, you can go to inspiredlibrary.org/submit and submit a brief story. And it will guide you in how to tell the part about the challenge and the moment of inspiration and the result and the principle that the person was learning. And when that story goes in, there will be then some volunteer writers that may well contact you and help you try to polish that story, and by getting the right kinds of details in it so that it will invite interpretation and engage your audience, and so that you can share it with family and those that you would like to. Now, if you would like to view these webinar notes, you can go to inspiredlibrary.org/training, and you'll find the webinar notes there. You'll also find up at the top of that training page an article called Biblical Poetics for Filmmakers that I and some other BYU colleagues, we published. And poetics is a way of making something. And so a biblical poetics is a way of telling stories that filmmakers can tell that's based upon the way that the biblical writers told their stories. So these are all ways that you can get started on Inspire Library that are quite simple and that you might find quite helpful to you. And again, if you would like more information, you can just go to inspirelibrary.org/contact. And then contact us, and then we'll try to show you around the site some more. Okay, with that much, I'm going to turn it back over to our host here.
All right, thank you so much, Dennis.
While we're waiting, why don't I just say a few things, and then if you find something, you can tell me. So think about that bullying story. What was the principle that she learned? She learned that the scriptures were magical. There was something about that inspiration. And how were they magical? Notice how she put it that way. She didn't spell out what that meant. That's left for us to interpret what that means, that it was magical. But I think that what she meant was that she came to the scriptures with a question, and the scriptures led her to inspiration that helped her with that particular question that she had. A lot of people experience that as they go to these sacred texts. And Jews tend to believe that the scriptures are where much of what their inspiration is going to come from. That's where they study them so closely. Okay, now some of the other stories had different kinds of things, like the story about the soldier facing the military that was coming. He was just terrified, just fearful. Notice the details in that story that were told. How he saw the bayonet in front of his face. He looked up, he saw the face of the soldier. He smiled to the soldier smiled back. Do you see all those details? What's going on? Interpret it, help understand why, what was it that the inspiration led him to do? Somehow he was responding to that soldier like a person who has a face, not as just a force that he was had to deal with. And the principle, what did he learn? He somehow learned something ultimately about the Japanese people that helped him during the 4 years that he was in the camp. What did the little girl learn? Well, she learned, apart from her grandmother, talking with her grandmother, that there's got to be other ways sometimes with dealing with people, even when they're being really mean to you. And she did. She found another way. And so it's like when you're facing challenges, you need inspiration. How can I approach this thing in a different way that might be able to reach this person? In some cases, you just need to flee the person, and that might be a hard thing to have to do as well. But there'll be you're looking for some way to deal with this thing rather than feeling stuck, like I'm here and there's no way, there's nothing that I can do. It's looking for inspiration that will take you beyond that. And in the last story, you see that this boy who is so disappointed to realize that he is he descends from the people that the Romans tended to hate and wanted to just wipe off the earth and destroy their history and the whole thing. He was a descendant of those, and he wanted to be a great Roman. And he was just holding on to that kind of a thing until he saw the city where he was saved as an infant and taken up and adopted by Roman parents. And then he connected with his grandfather, and it just made a huge difference in his life. These are stories about inspiration. This is what we need in our lives, is inspiration. We have challenges. We need to see those challenges in the light of the inspiration that can be received to help us deal with them. And if you take the time to write up these stories and to share them, this is what will help your children and grandchildren be resilient. That research that was in that little video that we played said that the research that they did with 12 and 13-year-olds over a several year period showed that those children that knew their family history stories, the challenges that they faced, if they were told coherently and within an emotional honesty, those kids dealt with their own challenges better. That's the promise of what having these kinds of stories will do. And if you take the time to write out these stories, then you make a memorial out of it. You memorialize and will remember the time that inspiration helped you get past being stuck. Well, thank you for paying attention, and I wish you well in working on your family histories and telling these stories in engaging ways.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which is on September 21st with James Tanner. He will be giving a presentation entitled Breaking Through the Genealogy Technology Barrier. A recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow our Facebook and Twitter accounts. Thank you and have a wonderful week.